My name is Cree, and I live with my parents in a city called Cape Town. I can never leave my parents alone because they worry about me a lot, especially after the incident that happened with my sister last year. And what was that incident? You're about to hear it now. When my sister was in high school, she was a moody teenager. She would get upset very quickly, and her mood swings were frequent, just like any other random teenage girl of that time. There was nothing particularly weird about it, but yes, she was extraordinary in some ways. To cover her own expenses, she worked at a nearby bookstore after school. One day when I went to pick her up from school, I overheard her talking quietly to a boy on the sidewalk. Their conversation slowly turned into an argument. I parked my car right in front of them, and she angrily opened the door and sat inside without saying a word. She didn't utter a single word during the entire ride home, and I didn't want to invade her personal space given her mood, so I kept the conversation closed. This scenario took place on a Friday, and the next day I thought it would be the right time to ask her about the previous day's events, whatever she had experienced, good or bad. It was Saturday, so everyone was in a good mood because it was the weekend, so I thought, let's give it a chance. I went to her room quietly. She was sitting at her computer as usual, so I pulled up a chair next to her. I didn't start the conversation directly about the previous day. Instead, I gently asked her what her plans were for today, if she was going out with her friends or something. But she didn't reply to anything, despite my asking many questions. I know dealing with teenagers is challenging, but as an older sister, I felt I could at least try. However, she remained very busy on her computer, reading something intently. I then asked her what she was reading, thinking she could share it with me and it might pass the time. Her answer was quite unsettling. She said she was browsing the dark web, comparing it to how people search for answers on normal websites like Quora on the surface web. She explained that on this dark website, one could find answers to questions you wouldn't find anywhere else. She even mentioned that this website could provide answers to every type of dark question or situation. I didn't understand the site's address as it was strange, but the logo on the website had the words "Hidden Answers" written on it. I didn't know much about the dark web, but I knew that very creepy people use it because it's almost impossible to trace their identities. However, I didn't think my sister was doing anything seriously wrong. Yes, she was exploring a strange corner of the internet, but she wasn't engaging in anything illegal, just reading some questions and answers, which I thought was okay. As I said, she was a teenager, and it's natural for teenagers to have weird thoughts at that age, so I let her be and didn't see any harm in what she was doing. In fact, to bond with her better, I even asked her how I could browse the same website and see if I could find anything interesting or relevant there. She taught me how to navigate the site, and later I opened it on my laptop in my room. The first question I saw left me utterly shocked. Someone had posted on the site asking for advice because they had just killed their mother and didn't know how to dispose of the body. At first I thought this website was some kind of joke. How could there be such bizarre things? And if there were, what was my sister doing on it? But as I was thinking this, there was a reply to that conversation that was incredibly extreme. The person answering suggested cutting the body into very small parts to make it easier to hide or dispose of. They advised feeding the pieces to a stray dog, and if any parts remained, burning them with kerosene or petrol. I was horrified by what I was reading. Later, I found out that the person replying was a woman because she mentioned that the same methods she was describing were what she had used to dispose of her husband's body, and she had never been caught. After seeing all this, I was terrified. I immediately logged out, disconnected from the internet for the day, and didn't disturb my sister that night as she was already asleep. However, as an older sister, I definitely wanted to warn her about everything I had just experienced. It was really bizarre, and she shouldn't be on that website. The next day was Sunday, and we went grocery shopping as usual. While shopping, I told her about my experience and advised her to stay away from that website because it was full of really messed up people. After hearing my concerns, she reacted very strangely. She started laughing and told me, "Are you going to tell me what I should and shouldn't do with my life now?" My younger sister was very stubborn and never listened to anyone, which often got her into trouble. But what could we do? If she wasn't willing to listen, it was her choice. We could only guide her, but it was up to her to follow it. Hearing her harsh reply really hurt me, and I realized that there was no point in trying to convince her she wouldn't understand. When I think back to this story now and as I share it with you, I can't help but wish I had somehow convinced her. Maybe then she would still be with us today. Our lives changed forever after that day. I haven't mentioned my younger sister's name until now, but I think the time has come. Her name was Casey. On Sunday night, she went to a friend's house for a sleepover, and during that time I was having dinner with my parents. During the dinner conversation, my mom suddenly mentioned that she had a gut feeling that Casey was involved in something wrong, and we were unknowingly ignoring it. After our dinner discussion ended, I went to Casey's room as usual to tidy up and make it comfortable for her when she returned. While cleaning her room, I found some very strange items under her bed. There was a long rope, many burnt candles stored in a box, and several charred pages with unknown writings. All these things were kept inside a small wooden box. Despite examining the pages closely, I couldn't understand what was written on them. After discovering these things, I rushed to my parents, expressing my concern. I told them what I had found, but didn't know what was going on in Casey's life. My parents, especially my mom, were very sensitive to the situation. She was panicking, acting as if she didn't know how to help her daughter. Seeing them in such a state, I realized they couldn't help Casey, so I decided to take matters into my own hands. The next day, I went back to Casey's school, arriving earlier than usual because I wanted to find the boy who had been arguing with Casey on the sidewalk the previous Friday. Luckily, I found him nearby. I stopped the car in front of him, got him inside, and explained everything we had discovered about Casey. After talking to him, he revealed something horrifying. He told me that he had already broken up with Casey because she wanted him to participate in a satanic ritual she had read about on a dark website. Casey believed that performing this ritual would grant them special abilities to foresee future events, but he didn't want any part of it. That was why they broke up. After telling me this, he left, and it was time to pick up Casey. I picked her up from her usual spot, and as I looked at her in the rearview mirror, I could see that she was behaving strangely. Her eyes were bloodshot, and she literally looked like a devil. I didn't start any conversation with her, and she didn't say a word either. We drove home in silence. Seeing her like this, I realized that she probably hadn't slept at all during the Sunday sleepover. Her eyes were swollen and red, a sign of extreme stress. When she got home, she didn't greet anyone, didn't eat, didn't put her bag down, or change her clothes. She went straight to her room and closed the door. I knocked on her door, shouting that she didn't need to behave this way, that I knew everything, and that she shouldn't continue with these dangerous things. In response, she shouted back, telling me to stop trying to rule her life. She said she wasn't a little girl anymore and wouldn't listen to me. Hearing this, I felt deeply hurt. I realized that until Mom and Dad could handle this situation, I would continue to feel helpless. So I went downstairs to the living room, where I lay on the sofa, waiting for my grandmother and mother to return from the market. My grandmother was visiting my mother that day, and I hoped that either Casey would come clean in front of them or they would help her. While waiting, I fell asleep on the sofa. When I woke up, it was to the most horrifying experience our family had ever gone through. I realized that my hands and feet were tightly bound with rope, and my mouth was covered with duct tape. I thought there might be an intruder in the house, and seeing myself in this state, I became even more worried about my sister. As I tried to analyze my surroundings, I started hearing light footsteps coming from the stairs. Slowly, as the footsteps grew closer, I realized it was Casey coming down. But as she approached, she didn't look like the mischievous, innocent girl she used to be. Instead, she was dressed entirely in black, with strange symbols drawn all over her clothes, face, and arms. As she descended the stairs, she was chanting something in a very low voice. Her eyes had turned completely black, and her face looked horribly twisted. I started struggling to free myself, but it was no use. I had never seen her behave like this before. I didn't know if it was really her, if she was possessed, or if she had fully surrendered herself to dark forces. To my horror, she walked into the kitchen, grabbed a butcher knife, and then came towards me. She was no longer chanting, but a wicked grin was plastered across her face. I tried to shout through the tape, but she just laughed at me. She then calmly knelt beside me and whispered, "I told you not to interfere without warning." She plunged the knife into my leg. I screamed in pain, but the sound was muffled by the tape. The last thing I remember before blacking out was her leaning closer and saying, "You should have let me do what I wanted." I woke up in the hospital days later, surrounded by my parents and doctors. Casey had fled after the attack, leaving me for dead. The police are still searching for her, but it's like she vanished without a trace. The Casey I knew is gone, taken over by something far darker, and I will never forgive myself for not saving her in time. My name is Edward, and I am the one trying to uncover the mystery of the deep web. Before you think I'm crazy, you need to understand that I don't like what happens on that site. I'm not in favor of kidnapping, gun trades, or the infamous Red Door. These days, I'm a white hat hacker, helping protect computers from threats lurking in the deep web. But before I became an expert, I was once just a small user who, despite knowing a bit about computers, was naive about the dangers of spending time there. I would soon realize the hefty price of my ignorance. In 2017, everyone was obsessed with mystery boxes from the deep web. I logged onto a site, filled in my details, paid for a box, and anxiously waited for it to arrive. I was terrified, wondering if it was all a scam, or worse, if someone would come to my home, abduct me, and take my family away. To my surprise, no one kidnapped me, and the box eventually arrived. It was large but not as decorated as the ones I'd seen in videos. Many people embellished their boxes with fake spider webs or question marks, but mine was just a plain, low-quality box. People often ask me why I didn't make a video of the unboxing. The answer is simple: I had no desire to become famous. I was only interested in seeing what was inside the box and whether I had been scammed. When I opened it, I was slightly disappointed. Inside were a fake skull, a bat, a knife, and a rope, all items a kidnapper might use, but also things you could easily buy from a store. Among these objects, something else was hidden: a small French bell wrapped in cloth. The bell worked perfectly fine, but I felt uneasy holding it. I was about to wrap it back up when I noticed an inscription on it: "To whoever has rightfully acquired this bell, be joyful, for you have received their favor and blessing. They will come to you and grant you immense joy, the ultimate satisfaction, and emotions beyond measure." I was disturbed. I put the bell back and returned the items to the box, which I then stashed in a corner of my room. Being on vacation, I didn't have to go to work, so I headed to the kitchen with a smile, planning to make something for myself. As I entered the kitchen, I heard a strange noise behind me. When I turned around, I saw nothing had fallen, but something else caught my attention. The camera I had left in the dark had suddenly switched off. The lights had gone out by themselves, but that wasn't all. As I strained my eyes to see, I noticed something else: 2 white eyes about 2 feet away from me, staring in my direction. They weren't human eyes. As my eyes adjusted, I saw a shadowy figure. It was humanoid, dressed in black with a hat obscuring its face. Its body was long and thin, but its limbs were unnaturally bent. It looked human, but it wasn't. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. My entire body was frozen with fear. Gradually, I started feeling deeply sad. I wanted to cry, to throw myself out of a window. I couldn't understand what was happening to me. This wasn't my feeling. It was as if seeing that shadow had caused me to feel this way. Gathering all my strength, I tried to run as far away as I could. Since that day, I've often had nightmares where I see the same figure, not just in my home but everywhere I go. Whenever I feel a sudden wave of sadness, I know it's close by, hiding in the darkness, watching me. The scariest part is that only I can see it. I started to believe I was going crazy. This torment lasted for months, and it only got worse as the figure came closer. The worst day started when I actually managed to sleep, a rare occurrence back then. When I woke up, it was still dark. I had gone to bed with all the lights on, but when I opened my eyes, I was shocked to see they were all off. I knew something big was about to happen. I tried to get up, but my body wouldn't move. I could only stare ahead at my wardrobe. Suddenly, it opened by itself, and a strange figure began to emerge. "Who are you? Why are you doing this to me? What do you want?" I asked, terrified. The figure stepped forward, revealing itself for the first time without its jacket. Its body was gray and covered in leaves. Its mouth was tiny, barely visible, and its body was covered in wounds. Before I could look closer, it lunged toward me at a speed no human could match. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to breathe, and my heart was racing. After that day, the nightmares only intensified. I knew I couldn't escape it. I had to accept that this thing would follow me forever. One day, I found the bell again, lying on the floor where the figure had been. It dawned on me that I could never rid myself of it. I couldn't throw it away or destroy it. Someone else would have to willingly take it from me. Just as I had ordered it from the dark web, I decided to sell it there again, hoping someone else would take it off my hands. As expected, the bell ended up in the possession of another curious soul. I have no idea what that figure will do to them, but I know it will be horrific. Even after all this, my interest in the dark web didn't fade. Instead, it grew stronger. Though I never researched the bell, fearing it might come back to me, I dedicated myself to protecting people from falling into such traps. Over the past 5 years, I've become an expert in computer security. I now spend all my time hacking the accounts of those who try to do something big on the deep web and scaring off kids who don't realize what they're getting into. They may fear me, but I know I'm only trying to save them. Whenever I remember that night, fear grips me again. December was ending, and heavy snowfall blanketed everything. I was alone at home, playing video games in my room. My parents were out, so I decided to do something scary. I had recently heard about the dark web from my friends. My friend Nova told me it was a terrifying place, mentioning a Sinister platform where cannibals discussed their fantasies. Out of curiosity, I logged onto the Tor browser, which made browsing the deep web easy. I explored Hitman for Hire pages, disturbing torture videos, and other horrifying sites. I was about to start watching a scary movie when suddenly a link appeared with the message, "Not for the faint of heart. If you dare, click here." Without thinking, I clicked on it, and I still regret that decision today. My screen went black, and the word "live" appeared on the right. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, a white spotlight flicked on, revealing a woman standing in the middle of a filthy kitchen. Her face was hidden behind long black hair, and she wore dirty, white patient clothes stained with mud. The kitchen was disgusting, with dirty dishes piled high and cobwebs everywhere. Cockroaches scurried across the walls. But what caught my attention was an old stroller in the corner, the kind you'd see in a horror movie, dirty and covered in dust. Suddenly, I heard a baby crying. The sound was coming from the stroller, though I couldn't see the baby. I muttered to myself, feeling uneasy. Then, a chilling lullaby began to play. The woman started rocking the stroller in time with the music. Her long black hair made it hard to see her face, but I could feel her eyes on me. She spoke to the baby in a soothing tone. "Hush now, sweet child. Don't cry." The more she spoke, the louder the baby cried. "No, no, don't cry. If you do, I'll have to punish you," she said, her voice calm but menacing. She rocked the stroller harder, but the baby's cries only grew louder. "That's it. You've made your choice," she declared. She stopped rocking the stroller and walked to the side, picking up something from the floor. When she returned to the spotlight, I saw what she was holding: a glass jar with a metal lid. Inside, something was moving. When I realized what it was, my blood ran cold. The jar was filled with large red ants. What is she doing? Is she insane? I thought, horrified. The woman pushed her hair aside, revealing her face. The camera zoomed in and I nearly screamed. Her eyes were bulging and green, with a severe infection. Her cheeks were swollen and oozing, her entire face covered in sores. This wasn't makeup, it was real. She smiled, put a finger to her lips, and whispered, "It's time to put the little angel to sleep." The baby's cries had weakened by then, but the woman wasn't done. She opened the jar and, without flinching, scooped up a handful of ants. They must have been biting her, but she didn't react at all. Then, she did something even more horrifying. She started sprinkling the ants into the stroller. As soon as the ants hit the baby, the cries grew louder. I heard the baby's wails and the sound of ants swarming over its body. The crying continued, louder and more agonizing. I was frozen in terror. All I could do was watch as the woman kept dumping ants onto the baby. Suddenly, the screen went black again and the word "live" disappeared. The chat room exploded with messages. People were congratulating the woman, saying, "Good job, that was awesome, and can't wait for the next show." I closed the page, sick to my stomach. I couldn't believe what I had just seen. I turned off my computer, ran to the bathroom, and threw up. That night I couldn't sleep. The baby's screams haunted my dreams. I knew I had stumbled upon something horrifying and that I would never be the same again. This happened several years ago when I was a teenager. I was on summer vacation, and my parents decided to visit our village, a beautiful and peaceful place nestled in the mountains. The village was full of greenery, surrounded by dense forests that were filled with various wild animals. Every night, the air would be filled with the sounds of crickets, owls, and other nocturnal creatures. I was used to hearing these sounds, but what happened one night still gives me chills. One night I stayed up late chatting online with my friends. My parents had gone to bed and the whole house was quiet. The only light in my room came from my laptop screen. I was deeply engrossed in my conversation when I suddenly heard a noise coming from the balcony. At first I thought it was just an animal, maybe a cat or a raccoon. But as the noise continued, I started to feel uneasy. It was a soft scratching sound, like something was dragging its claws across the wooden floor of the balcony. The sound grew louder and I realized that whatever was making it was getting closer to my window. My heart started pounding in my chest. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't resist. Slowly I turned my head toward the window. What I saw made my blood run cold. There, crouched on the balcony, was a dark figure. It was too large to be an animal, but it wasn't human either. Its body was covered in thick, matted fur, and its eyes glowed a bright yellow in the darkness. It had long, twisted limbs that ended in sharp claws, and its mouth was filled with jagged teeth. It was staring directly at me. I froze, unable to move or scream. The creature slowly stood up, its head nearly touching the top of the balcony door. It leaned closer to the window, its eyes locked on mine. For what felt like an eternity, we just stared at each other. Then it suddenly let out a low, guttural growl. That sound snapped me out of my paralysis. I jumped up and ran to my parents' room, slamming the door behind me. I woke them up, frantic and shaking, trying to explain what I had seen. My father grabbed a flashlight and went out to check the balcony, but when he got there, the creature was gone. There were deep scratch marks on the wooden floor, but no other signs of the creature. My parents tried to calm me down, saying it was probably just a bad dream or a trick of the light, but I knew what I saw was real. For the rest of our stay, I couldn't sleep without keeping a light on, and I avoided going near the balcony at night. Even now, years later, I can still vividly remember that creature's glowing eyes and the terror I felt. I've never been able to explain what I saw that night, but I know one thing for sure: I never want to encounter it again.